The lights of Transit Hub Epsilon 7 flickered in their standard rhythm, casting soft blue glows across the metal corridors where hundreds of species moved about their daily business with practiced ease and mutual respect. Kale wiped the grease from his hands onto his already dirty work. Uniformans smiled at the passing Quilthian merchant who bobbed its gelatinous head in, greeting. He had been working on the station for 2 years now, maintaining the environmental systems that kept everyone alive and comfortable in the cold vacuum of space. The young human engineer loved his job because it let him meet species from across the galaxy, learning their customs and sharing stories over meals in the communal dining halls. His best friend on the station was Zara, another human who worked in the freight handling section, down in the lower cargo bays, where the heavy containers came and went with each docking ship. She was different from Kale in almost every way that mattered. Where he was slim and soft-spoken, she was built like she'd been carved from dense stone. All compact muscle and watchful silence. Zara came from one of the Deathworld colonies, a place called Crag 7 that Kale had only heard about in whispered conversations among the more knowledgeable species. The station operated under strict non-violence protocols, enforced by a security team that mostly dealt with disputes over docking fees and the occasional cultural misunderstanding about personal space or food preparation. Violence was so rare that the medical bay kept its trauma equipment in storage, gathering dust while the doctors treated minor ailments, and homesickness. Gale had just finished replacing a faulty air recycler in Section 7 when his scanner picked up an anomaly in the ventilation shaft that ran behind the Varas Syndicate's warehouse space. The Varas were reptilian traders who dealt in exotic goods, or so their official documentation claimed. He squeezed into the maintenance tunnel, his headlamp cutting through the darkness as he followed the readings on his handheld device. The air smelled wrong here, thick with something chemical that made his nose itch and his eyes water slightly. He found the source quickly enough. Someone had installed an unauthorized bypass in the filtration system, creating a dead zone where the station's air quality sensors couldn't detect what was being moved through the ventilation. Kyle took pictures with his scanner, documenting the illegal modification because that was his job, and he took pride in doing things properly. He didn't hear them coming until the access panel behind him clanged open and rough hands grabbed his ankles, yanking him backward out of the tunnel. 3 VROs surrounded him in the dim service corridor, their scales gleaming like oil in the low light and their vertical pupils contracting to threatening slits. The largest one, wearing what looked like expensive off-world jewelry, stepped forward and spoke in heavily accented standard. "You see nothing here?" Human maintenance worker. Kale's heart hammered in his chest, but he tried to keep his voice steady like his training had taught him. "I have to report all unauthorized modifications to station security. It's required by my contract and safety protocols." The Vros looked at each other and made a clicking, a sound that might have been laughter. "This one thinks protocols matter more than breathing," said the one with the Julrakal. Tried to back away, but his shoulders hit the corridor wall. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job and following the rules that keep everyone safe." The Vros named Kraxus, who Kale recognized as their enforcer from security briefings, cracked his knuckles in a gesture that seemed universal across Species Station. "Security is slow and stupid. They care more about paperwork than truth. We have friends in administration who will say you made a mistake in your report." Kale felt real fear now, the kind that made his hands shake and his mouth go dry. "Please, I'll just file a standard report and let the officials sort it out. I don't care about your business." Kraxus moved faster than Kale expected, his scaled fist connecting with the human stomach and driving all the air from his lungs. Kale doubled over, gasping, trying to understand what was happening because violence didn't occur on Epsilon 7. It was against every rule and regulation. The second blow caught him in the ribs, and he heard something crack inside his chest. He fell to the floor, curling into a protective ball, while the boots and clawed feet came down again and again through the pain and the growing darkness. Kale heard them talking about lessons and respect and keeping mouths shut. Then there was nothing but black silence. He woke in the medical bay, his body wrapped in diagnostic fields that hummed softly while repairing his broken ribs and damaged organs. The station doctor, insectoid Trell with kind compound eyes, informed him that a maintenance bot had found him and triggered emergency protocols. Kale tried to explain what happened, but his words came out slurred and confused. When security arrived, they took his statement with professional detachment, nodding and recording but offering no promises. The Vross claim you fell during routine maintenance, the security chief said with obvious discomfort. Our sensors in that corridor were experiencing technical difficulties during the relevant time period, so we have no video evidence of assault. Kale felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with his ribs, so they just get away with it. They nearly killed me over doing my job correctly. The security chief looked away, unable to meet his eyes. We will investigate fully, but without evidence or witnesses. And given the Vross Syndicate's political connections with certain council members, our hands are unfortunately tied after they left. Kale lay in the medical bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling more alone than he had since arriving at the station. When Zara appeared in the doorway, she didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at him with those Deathworld eyes that seemed to see more than they. Then she walked to his bedside and sat in the visitor's chair, her calloused hands resting on her knees. "Who did this to you?" she asked quietly. Khalil told her everything, the words spilling out along with tears. He didn't know he'd been holding back. Zara listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral, except for something cold and dangerous that flickered behind her eyes when he finished. She stood up and put one hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Rest now," she said. "I'll take care of this." Before Kale could ask what she meant, Zara was gone, moving out of the medical bay with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything the nurses found. Kale agitated after that, trying to explain that Zara didn't understand how things worked on the station, that violence would only make everything worse. But no one really listened because humans were known for being emotional and protective of their friends. And surely she would calm down once she had time to think rationally about the situation. They didn't know what. Kale was beginning to suspect that. Zara came from a place where thinking rationally about violence meant something entirely different than it did on Epsilon 7. Zara walked through the lower maintenance corridors with purpose, her boots making soft sounds against the metal grating that most species would never notice her. Mind had already shifted into a different mode, one that she hadn't used since leaving Crag 7 3 years ago. Memories came flooding back. Whether she wanted them or not, she had been 6 years old when her father first took her outside the colony walls to teach her how to survive on a planet that actively tried to kill everything soft. And we Crag 7 had gravity that was nearly twice what Earth considered normal, which meant every step was an exercise in strength and every fall could break bones. The air was thicker there, heavy with moisture and the smell of the jungle that surrounded the human settlements on all sides. "Listen before you look," her father had whispered while they crouched in the undergrowth. "The predators here evolved to hunt things faster and stronger than us, so we have to be smarter." The spine stalkers were the apex predators on Crag 7. Six-legged creatures with exoskeletons harder than most, ship armor and pack intelligence that rivaled some spacefaring species. They could tear through reinforced doors and their venom could drop a full-grown human in seconds. But humans had learned to hunt them back. Her father taught her to read the signs: broken vegetation, claw marks on trees, the particular smell that meant a pack was nearby and preparing to attack. He taught her where to strike to penetrate the exoskeleton, how to move in the high gravity with efficiency that conserved energy, how to think like something that existed only to kill. By the time she was 12, Zara had killed her first spine stalker alone, using nothing but a blade, and the lessons burned into her brain. Through years of survival, the colony celebrated because it meant she was an adult by Crag 7 standards, capable of protecting herself and others when the walls failed or the power went out. She learned something important that day, something that the softer worlds never taught their children's. Violence wasn't evil or good. It was a tool like any other, and what mattered was when and why you chose to use it now. Walking through the clean corridors of Epsilon 7, Zara felt that old certainty settling over her like a familiar coat. The station's security systems were sophisticated by most standards, designed to track and monitor every movement in the public areas, but they had blind spots in the maintenance sections because no one expected threats to come from there. Zara accessed a maintenance terminal using her freight handler credentials, pulling up the station schematic and overlaying it with the scheduled data she'd memorized from months of watching patterns. Vross Syndicate operated out of Warehouse Section 12, which connected to the main cargo hub through 3 primary corridors and a dozen smaller service tunnels. She began her hunt in the way her father had taught her, by learning the territory and understanding the prey's habits and weaknesses. Over the next 6 hours, she moved through the station like a shadow, observing the Vross from vantage points they never thought to watch. She saw how they moved in groups of 3, how they checked certain corners but ignored others, how their vision didn't work as well in the specific blue spectrum lighting used in the older sections. Most importantly, she identified each individual and their role in the group hierarchy. Station security noticed her eventually. Of course, a Quilthian officer approached her in one of the observation corridors, its gelatinous body rippling with concern. Freight handler Zara, you are not scheduled for duty in this section. Is there assistance you require? She looked at the officer with calm eyes and spoke in the flat tone she'd learned to use when she didn't want to explain herself. Just doing some personal research on station layout, trying to improve efficiency in my cargo routing. The lie was thin, but the officer had no reason to suspect a human freight worker of anything more serious than obsessive job performance. Please return to authorized areas when your research is complete, the Quilthian said before flowing away down the corridors. Are waited exactly 1 hour before continuing her surveillance, this time using paths that avoided the security patrol rotations she'd now mapped completely. She found what she was looking for in a recycling junction that connected to the Vross warehouse. The youngest member of their group, barely more than a juvenile by his scale patterns, often came here alone to smoke some kind of narcotic vapor that was probably illegal, but too minor for security to care about. He arrived right on schedule, settling into a corner with his vapor device and closing his eyes in chemical relaxations. Zara dropped from the ventilation shaft above him, landing in a crouch that absorbed the impact silently despite the heavy gravity she was used to moving in the young. Vross's eyes snapped open, and he reached for the blade at his belt. But Zara's hand was already there, gripping his wrist with enough pressure to make the bones creak. Don't, she said. Quietly he froze, every survival instinct in his reptilian brain screaming that he was facing something dangerous up close. Zara could see he was terrified, his pupils dilating and his scales rippling with stress colors. I'm going to ask you one question, and you're going to answer truthfully, she continued in that same flat voice. If you lie to me, I'll know, and then we'll have a much longer and more painful conversation. The young Vross nodded frantically, unable to speak. Which one of your group struck my friend first? The human engineer they beat in the service corridor? His throat worked, trying to form words. Cakraxis. He always strikes first. He enjoys it. Zara released his wrist and stepped back. The young Vross scrambled away from her, pressing himself against the wall. You're going to forget this conversation, she told him, if you warn Craxus or anyone else. I'll come back and we'll talk again, do you understand? He nodded so hard his whole body shook. Zara turned and walked away, leaving him trembling in the recycling junction. She had her target now. The station continued its normal operations around her, thousands of beings going about their peaceful lives, unaware that something from a Deathworld was moving among them with predatory intents. Era felt the old certainty growing stronger with each step. She had tried to be like them, to embrace the gentleness and diplomacy that made station life possible, but they had hurt Kale, her friend, the one person on this station who treated her like she was more than just a dangerous curiosity from a backwards land. In doing so, they had reminded her of what she was beneath the careful civility she was from Crag 7, where humans didn't survive by hoping others would be kind. They survived by making sure that anyone who hurt the pack learned to regret it. The word spread through the station's various species communities, like ripples in water. Carried by the gossip networks that existed in every multicultural hub, human was hunting. Quilthian merchants discussed it in their fluid language, expressing confusion because humans were known as the friendly ones, the diplomatic species that built trade relationships and shared their music. The Trell scientists analyzed it with their compound eyes, reviewing anthropological data that most of them had filed away as irrelevant historical curiosities. A few elder species, the ones who had been traveling the stars long enough to remember Earth's first contact and the careful negotiations that followed, felt a cold recognition. They began sharing old reports, warnings that had been issued when humanity first joined the galactic community. There was a reason humans were restricted from certain military positions, a reason their Deathworld colonies required special oversight, but those warnings had faded over decades of pleasant interaction. Buried under the weight of human kindness and cooperation now, something was remembering what they had forgotten. Zara chose the central marketplace for her confrontation, a decision that puzzled the few security officers who had started tracking her movements. Marketplace was the most public area on the station, a vast open space where hundreds of species gathered to trade goods and socialize under the warm, artificial sunlight. It made no sense from a tactical standpoint unless you understood what she was really doing. This wasn't about quiet revenge or hidden violence. This was about sending a message that would echo through every corner of the galaxy's trade. Network Scraxus arrived at his usual time, swaggering through the marketplace with two other Varos flanking him, their scales gleaming with expensive oils and their claws adorned with rings of precious metals. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered anything more dangerous than themselves. Zara stepped into their path from between two vendor stalls, her movement casual but deliberately blocking their route. Akraxis stopped, his vertical pupils narrowing as he recognized the human female from the freight dock's move. "Mammal," he said with lazy contempt, "we have business, and you are in the way around them." The marketplace grew quieter. The species noticed the confrontation and began backing away with the universal instinct that recognized danger. Zara stood perfectly still, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing calm and measured. "You put my friend in the medical bay," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. "I'm here to discuss that with you." Craxus's laugh was a harsh clicking sound that his companions echoed. The weak one who couldn't mind his own business? He learned an important lesson about respecting those stronger than himself. He took a step forward, bringing himself within striking distance. "Perhaps you need same lesson, little human. Go back to your cargo containers before you get hurt." Zara's expression didn't change. "I'm going to give you one chance to apologize and turn yourself into station security," she said after that. The choice gets taken away. The marketplace was completely silent now, with hundreds of beings watching from behind stalls and pillars, their various sensory organs fixed on the confrontation. Crassus made the clicking laugh again, and his hand moved faster than most species could track. His claws extended and aimed at Zara's throat. She moved. The Vros's strike hit empty. Zara shifted her weight and rotated, her body responding with the efficiency born from years of dodging things much faster and more deadly than an overconfident reptilian smuggler. Her counterstrike was precise, her fist driving into the nerve cluster just below Crax's shoulder joint in Earth normal gravity. The blow would have been painful in the station's standard gravity, which was lighter than what she trained in her entire life. Her Deathworld strength punch shattered the bone and severed the major nerve bundle. Crax's arm went limp. Hanging useless at his side, he roared in pain and confusion. Unable to process what had just happened, his companions moved to flank her, but Zara was already in motion. Her body, low and balanced, she caught the first one's leg sweep and used his own momentum to flip him into the second. Both of them crashing into a vendor stall and a tangle of scales and limbs. Craxus tried to strike with his remaining good arm, but Zara was inside his reach, her hands finding pressure points in joint locations with the certainty of someone who had studied anatomy as a survival skill. She broke his other arm at the elbow, the crack echoing through the marketplace like a gunshot. "That's for his ribs," she said calmly. Her voice still conversational. Crax fell to his knees, his reptilian brain finally registering that he was prey. Not predator, he tried to scuttle backward, but Zara followed. Her movements unhurried and methodical, she struck his knee with a precise kick that shattered the joint that's for his kidney. The watching crowd was transfixed, unable to look away from something that violated every principle of station life. Vross's two companions tried to rush her from behind, but she heard them coming, sensed their approach through the tiny air currents and the subtle sounds their scales made against the floor. She spun and struck them both down with blows that left them gasping and unable to rise. Then she returned her attention to Craxus, who was now lying on his back, his scales faded to the pale colors of terror. "That's for making him afraid," she said, and drove her fist into his chest, cracking the bone plate that protected his vital organs. Craxus couldn't scream anymore. His respiratory system too damaged to produce sound, he could only stare up at the human female with eyes that finally understood what his species had been too. Arrogant to Cesara knelt beside him, her hand gripping his jaw and forcing his mouth open. The crowd gasped, multiple species making sounds of shock and horror. Vross anatomy was well known among traders. Their spinal structure ran through their throat, protected by thick cartilage and connected to their brain through a series of nerve clusters. It was considered impossible to access without surgical tools. Zara's hand went into Craxus's mouth, her fingers finding the gaps in the cartilage with practiced precision. Her other hand braced against his chest. She pulled. The sound was wet and terrible, a combination of tearing tissue and breaking bone that made several species in the crowd turn away. Craxus convulsed once, then went still, his body entering shock as his nervous system tried to process catastrophic damage. Zara stood up slowly, holding the extracted section of Craxus's spine in her hand, blood running down her arm and dripping onto the marketplace floor. The Vross would live. The section she'd removed wasn't immediately fatal, and the station's medical technology could repair almost anything, given time, but he would never walk the same way again. Never move without remembering this moment. She looked around at the assembled crowd, at the hundreds of faces and sensory organs staring at her with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. "He hurt my friend," she said simply, her voice carrying in the absolute silence. "I told him what would happen." Then she dropped the spine segment on the ground at her feet and waited for station security to arrive. No one moved to stop her. No one dared to come close. They just watched as the human female from the Deathworld colony stood in the center of their peaceful marketplace, surrounded by broken Vross and pooling blood, waiting with the patience of something that had nothing left to fear. Station security surrounded Zara in a wide circle, their weapons drawn but pointing at the ground because none of them quite knew what to do with a human who had just done the impossible. The security chief, a Quilthian named Morse, who had served on Epsilon 7 for 15 years without ever witnessing serious violence, approached with visible hesitation freight handler Zara. "You are being detained for assault in violation of station peace protocols," Morse said, its gelatinous body rippling with stress. "Please come with us without resistance." Zara held out her hands, wrists together, making no attempt to flee or fight. The blood on her arms was already drying, turning dark against her skin. "I'm ready," she said quietly. They placed restraints on her that were designed for species much larger and more dangerous than humans, because no one had ever needed to arrest a human for violence before the medical teams rushed in to stabilize Craxus and his companions, working with frantic efficiency to keep them alive. The marketplace remained eerily quiet as Zara was led away, the crowd parting before her like water in the holding cells. Zara sat on the simple bench and waited while the station's legal system tried to figure out what to do with her. The problem was immediately apparent to anyone who looked at the UN regulations. Galactic law was built on thousands of years of precedent involving hundreds of species. But humans were relatively new to the community and their legal status was complicated. The surveillance footage from the marketplace was reviewed by a dozen different legal experts, each one reaching conflicting conclusions. Yes, Zara had initiated the physical confrontation. Craxus had struck first, with clear intent to harm. Yes, her response was disproportionate by most species standards. She had given warning and opportunity to surrender peacefully. The Vross Syndicate hired expensive lawyers who argued for Zara's immediate execution, citing the permanent damage to Craxus's spine and nervous system. Human advocacy groups countered with evidence of the original assault on Kale and the station's failure to protect its citizens. Legal arguments went in circles for 3 days while Zara remained in detention, eating the meals they brought her and sleeping with the calm efficiency of someone conserved energy out of Habiton. The 4th day, the human ambassador arrived. Ambassador Chen was a woman in her 60s who had spent 40 years navigating the complex politics of galactic diplomacy. She arrived on a fast courier ship with a full legal team and documentation that made the station administrators very nervous. The trial, if it could be called that, convened in the station's main council chamber with representatives from 24 species observing. Ambassador Chen stood before the assembled judges and council members with the bearing of someone who had argued far more important cases. I understand the concern, she began, her voice measured and professional. What freight handler Zara did appear shocking to species who have lived in peace for generations. But I must provide context that seems to have been forgotten. She activated a holographic display that showed Earth's original contact documentation when humanity joined the galactic community. We were classified as a Class 12 Deathworld species, the highest dangerous classification that still permits spacefaring status. The display showed images of Earth's predators, natural disasters, diseases, and the violence that had marked human history. We were granted membership on the condition that we suppress our more aggressive tendencies and embrace diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Ambassador Chen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were hard, and we have kept that promise. For 70 years, humans have been model citizens, building, trading, helping, befriending species across the galaxy. She paused, letting the words settle, but there was always a second part to that agreement, one that many species chose to forget. The display changed, showing psychological profiles and behavioral analysis. Humans are classified as a compassion-aggression paradox species. We are capable of extreme kindness and extreme violence, often toward the same individuals. She looked directly at the Vross legal representative. We will accept almost any wrong committed against ourselves with forgiveness and understanding. But there is one trigger that overrides our diplomatic training: harm to our pack, our friends, our chosen family. The council chamber was completely silent. When you harm a human's pack member, you don't face human diplomacy anymore, Ambassador Chen continued. You face human nature, the nature that let us survive on a planet that killed 90% of large predator species, the nature that made us apex predators before we even left our own world. She closed the display and faced the judges. Zara gave warning. She offered surrender. She followed the Deathworld protocol that is written into every human's genetic memory. Protect the pack at any cost, the head judge, an elderly Trell with wise compound eyes, spoke carefully. You are saying we should excuse violence because it is in her nature? No, Ambassador Chen replied firmly. I'm saying you need to understand that what you call violence, we call protection, what you call excessive force, we call appropriate response to pack threat. She pulled up the medical reports on Kale. This human was beaten nearly to death for doing his job correctly, and station security did nothing because the Vross had political connections. Her voice grew harder. You created a situation where the only justice available required Deathworld solutions. The legal arguments continued for hours, with precedents cited and counter-arguments presented. Finally, the judges called for a recess to deliberate. They returned 6 hours later with a verdict that satisfied no one but avoided galactic incident freight. Handler Zara is released on the following grounds, the head judge announced first. The initial assault on Engineer Kale is confirmed through testimony and circumstantial evidence. Second, while her response was extreme, she did provide warning and opportunity for peaceful resolution. Third, the victim Craxus will survive with medical intervention, though his quality of life will be significantly reduced. The judge's voice grew stern, however. The Vross Syndicate is hereby banished from all stations under human protection protocols, and a formal warning is being issued to all trade networks about the consequences of harming human citizens. Ambassador Chen nodded. Accepting the compromise, the Vross representative tried to object, but was silenced by the judge's final statement. This council has reviewed the original human contact agreements and finds that humanity has indeed kept its promises. They have been peaceful, diplomatic, and valuable members of our community. The judge looked directly at the Vross, but we were warned in documentation that most of us never bothered to read that humans protect their own with Deathworld ferocity. Today we learned that warning was not metaphorical. Zara was released from detention that evening. As she walked out of the holding area, she found Ambassador Chen waiting for her. That was reckless, the ambassador said quietly. You've set back human Vross relations by decades and given ammunition to every species that thinks we're too dangerous to trade with. Zara met her eyes without flinching. He hurt Kale. Someone had to show them that we don't just accept that Ambassador Chen's side, I know. And between you and me, I'm glad someone finally did. But you understand this changes things, I know. Zara said, good. The ambassador replied, because now you're going to help me clean up the mess. We need to show the galaxy that humans can be both fierce protectors and reliable partners. She handed Zara a datapad, starting with a formal apology tour and community service. Diplomatic violence is still violence. We need to prove we're worth the trouble. Zara took the pad and allowed herself a small smile. Yes, ma'am. As Ambassador Chen walked away, she called back over her shoulder, and Zara, your friend Kale is asking to see you for the first time since the incident. Zara's expression softened. She had protected her pack. Everything else was just details. Kale was sitting up in the medical bay when Zara arrived, his torso still wrapped in healing fields, but his eyes clear and alert. He watched her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read, part relief, part concern, part something else entirely. They told me what you did, said quietly. As she took the seat beside his bed, Sarah nodded, her hands resting on her knees, still showing faint stains under the fingernails. Despite thorough washing I had to. You pulled out his spine, Kale said, and his voice cracked slightly in front of hundreds of witnesses. You extracted part of his actual spine. He'll live, Zara replied. The medical team says he'll walk again eventually. With therapy and augmentation, Kale was quiet for a long moment. Processing, I didn't know you were capable of that. Most people don't. Zara said that's kind of the point of joining galactic civilization. We're supposed to be better than our base nature. She looked at him directly, but he hurt you. Kale, he beat you until your ribs broke and your organs bled. And the station did nothing because he had political connections, so you became judge and executioner. No, Zara said firmly. I became what I've always been. Someone from a world where you protect your pack or everyone dies. Kale leaned back against his pillows, wincing slightly at the movement. I'm not your pack, Zara. We're just coworkers who eat lunch together sometimes. She smiled slightly on Crag 7. That's exactly what pack means, people. You share food with, people who watch your back. People you'd die for. I don't want you dying for me. Kale said, and I definitely don't want you killing for me. I didn't kill him. Zara pointed out. I just made sure he'll remember what happens when you hurt someone under human protection. They sat in silence for a while, the medical equipment humming softly around them. Finally, Kale spoke again. Thank you, Zara. Looks surprised for what? For caring enough to risk everything, he said. Even if I think you went too far. Even if I'm terrified of what you're capable of. I understand why you did it. He reached out and touched her hand briefly. You're a good friend. Zara, just maybe try to use words before spines next time. She laughed. A short surprised sound. I'll try to remember that. While Zara was visiting Kale, the news of the Epsilon 7 incident was spreading through galactic communication. Networks at the speed of light in dozens of worlds. Species gathered to discuss the implications. The Quilthian merchants revised their security protocols and started treating human traders with noticeably more courtesy. The Trell scientists published papers analyzing human psychology and recommending updated contact procedures. Negotiations involving human worlds suddenly found that the other side was much more willing to offer fair terms. No one wanted to discover what would happen if they upset a human badly enough to trigger what the academics were now calling Deathworld protection protocols. The Vross community fractured in the aftermath crisis. survived his injuries, but would never fully recover. Spending months in intensive therapy learning to walk with augmented supports, his reputation as an enforcer was destroyed. Hard to intimidate people when everyone knows a single human female had dismantled you in front of witnesses. The Vross Syndicate itself collapsed within weeks, their political connections abandoning them once the full scope of the incident became public. Other Vross traders, the legitimate ones who had always resented the Syndicate's criminal activities, quickly distanced themselves. A news story began circulating through Vross space networks, spreading to their colonies and trade posts. It was told as a warning to young Vross, who thought their natural armor and claws made them invincible. The story went like this: there are mammals in the galaxy who smile and build and create beautiful things, who will trade fairly and laugh at your jokes and treat you with respect. But these mammals come from worlds that tried to kill them for millions of years. They survived by becoming predators that other predators feared. They learned to hunt in packs, to use tools, to think and plan, and never forget a wrong done to their own. If you meet these mammals, treat them with honor, share food with them, trade fairly, respect their customs, and never, ever harm their pack, because if you do, you'll learn that their kindness is a choice, not a weakness. You'll learn that beneath the diplomacy and friendship is something old and cold and absolutely without mercy. Learn why Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld and why they survived. The story always ended the same way, with Craxus lying broken in the marketplace while the human female stood over him, holding his spine in her hand. It became a cautionary tale, shared across species and modified to fit different cultural contexts. Human diplomats reported a strange phenomenon: negotiations became easier, disputes resolved more quickly, and instances of violence against human citizens dropped to nearly zero. The galaxy had been reminded of something it had forgotten. During 70 years of pleasant cooperation, humans were gentle by choice, not by nature. 6 months after the incident, Zara returned to her work on the freight docks. Other species gave her space now, a respectful distance that she found both amusing and slightly sad. She missed the casual friendships she'd had before, when people saw her as just another worker instead of a walking reminder of human capability for violence. But Kale still brought her coffee during breaks, still sat beside her in the common areas, still treated her like a friend instead of a threat. One morning, as they watched the ships dock and depart through the viewport, Kale asked the question he'd been holding back: do you regret it? What you did to Craxus? Zara thought about it seriously before answering. I regret that it was necessary. She said finally, I regret that the station's systems failed so badly that violence became the only justice available. She sipped her coffee. But I don't regret protecting you. I'd do it again if I had to. Kale nodded slowly. The ambassador said, you're helping with community outreach now, showing people that humans can be both protective and peaceful. Yeah, Zara confirmed. Lots of meetings. Lots of explaining Deathworld psychology to species who think evolution is supposed to make you weaker so you can fit into civilization better. Is it working? She smiled mostly. People are starting to understand that human gentleness isn't weakness, it's strength. Being held in reserve as they sat together, watching the commerce of the galaxy flow past their window. Neither of them noticed the small notation that had been added to the station's central database. It was buried deep in the administrative files. Flagged for review by security and diplomatic personnel, the note was simple. Human citizens are to be afforded full protection under station protocols. Failure to investigate crimes against humans will result in immediate review. See Incident ISVAN 28474, consequences of negligence below that. In smaller text was the real message: humans keep their promises. They promised to be peaceful, diplomatic, and constructive members of galactic civilization. They have kept that promise. But they also promised to protect their own. Remember both promises in the medical wing. The Trell doctors had created a new training module for their staff. It covered human anatomy, human psychology, and most importantly, human bonding behavior. The final slide showed an image of Earth from space. Blue and green and deceptively peaceful, the text read, "This is a Class 12 Deathworld. The humans survived it by becoming apex predators with social bonds stronger than armor. Treat them with respect. Protect them from harm. And remember that their friendship is valuable precisely because it comes from beings who know the cost of violence. They chose kindness over killing. Every single day, honor that choice by ensuring they never have to make the other one back on the freight docks. Zara finished her coffee and stood up, ready to return to work. Kale smiled up at her. Same time tomorrow. Same time tomorrow? She confirmed Dan somewhere in the vast machinery of galactic civilization. A quiet understanding settled into place. Humans were welcome. Valued and protected not because they were weak and needed protection, but because they were strong and chose peace anyway. That choice deserved respect, and anyone who failed to show that respect would learn exactly what humanity was capable of when kindness stopped being the preferred option. The story of Zara and the Epsilon 7 incident would be told for generations, a reminder that the most dangerous predators are the ones who choose not to hunt until you give them a reason.